We are today having an interview with the Lebanese member of the parliament, Mr. Mark Daou, in the city of Los Angeles, California. Welcome to you all. My name is Fouad Barakat, and we in the Druze Times, as you know, was formed in 2019 by Mr. Hassan Jauhari. The Druze Times is an independent US-based outlet that is focused on Druze community news and interests. The Times is not affiliated with any political party here or abroad, and it is completely self-funded. Our mission is to provide an accurate, truthful, and impartial account of current events of interest to the Druze community worldwide. I'm going to jump right in. Our first question is not really political, but because of your sociology background, I would like to get your opinion and perspective on how do you assess the state of the union of the Druze communities, first in Lebanon, two in Syria, and three in occupied Palestine and occupied Syria, the Golan Heights.
Yeah. Again, I think the community is highly connected. It is going through probably one of the worst times all across the regions where they are present, including Jordan as well. I believe that the situation in Syria is the most threatening when it comes to security risks, whether we're talking about Jaramana, the suburbs around Damascus, or if we're talking about Jabal al-Arab or the Huran area. And I think that continues to be the case given the lack of the total chaos in Syria and the inability of assuming proper security measures there. And probably for the first time we're seeing big amounts of Syrian Jews leaving Syria, which is not a common trait within that country because they're a farming industrious population that is working there. So I think that will continue to put a lot of pressure on them. In Lebanon, the economic situation is very harsh. The numbers are telling us that nearly we're close to having half the Lebanese Jews being outside Lebanon. The situation in Palestine is completely different. After the annexation, the illegal annexation of Israel of the Golan Heights and the war in Syria, most of the Jews within the Golan Heights who used to go study in Syria because it was cheaper, because they wanted to be connected to the heart of their country and all of that, were forced to start moving towards Haifa, Tel Aviv and other areas to continue their education or to find jobs and others. And since then, there has been a massive shift in the interconnectivity of the Druze community within that region together. And unfortunately, that is the most stable community that is present among the Druze today, that continues to live in its own villages that it historically existed in and to thrive and work.
So thank you. So basically, the point is, in every one of these countries, there's unique and specific problems that each one of the communities are facing, but the most severe are basically in Syria and Lebanon.
By far. Lebanon, it's an economic issue. In Syria, it's economic as well as security issue.
Okay, thank you. What do you think about all the traditional Lebanese parties? Do you think they stayed true to their principles and mission?
No, I think the current results indicate that those parties have failed to deliver any prosperity to their people. They became highly engaged in corruption, and they became, even worse, highly engaged in the undermining of the formation of states which would protect the community. As a minority in all the states that the Druze are in, all 4 Middle Eastern states, if those states are not democratic, accountable, enjoy the rule of law, then the community cannot prosper and will end up leaving and emigrating from its origins or hometowns to find better chances of survivability. And I think those parties have failed on national political level, but also on the local level in building or protecting the community through building community institutions and organizations that are transparent, fully functional, non-politically aligned, that cater to the entire community. And unfortunately, the current situation is we've got only organizations that are at the service of nepotistic purposes and clientelism as it is. And this again, for example, in Lebanon, half of the Druze population now lives in the cities to be away from institutions that are highly controlled by political parties.
This really is a follow-up. So how do you rate their performance in the past 50 years? Do you believe they will be able to continue to sustain their grip on power, the government and its institutions, especially in lieu of their miserable performance?
I believe the community is changing very fast. The levels of education and immigration, the connectivity of the diaspora with the residents of the countries where we are in, is changing the dynamic and the influence that the traditional parties or zaims have. And given that those zaims' main power comes from their ability to control state institutions or influence state policy, and as those states became weaker, especially in Syria and in Lebanon, therefore the community had to find alternatives to survive, finding jobs, finding opportunities, education. This is again why a lot have left the mountains and the traditional homes and villages and moved to Beirut, moved to Dubai, moved to the US, moved to other places, whether it's internal migration or external emigration. They have continued to do that because their chances of survivability are higher. And therefore, with all that movement, the power base that the traditional parties depend on has been eroded by this transformation within the community. And therefore, we are going to start seeing a total shift within the community towards more independent, community-led organizations, and it's starting to appear as we go.
Thank you. The overwhelming majority of the Lebanese people, including the Druze community, believe that all the traditional political parties, including Hezbollah and the Orange Party and future parties, are all corrupt. كلٌ يعني كلٌ. What do you think?
I believe كلٌ يعني كلٌ, which is all of them means all of them, is a fundamental slogan. It needs to be applied in terms of accountability. It does not mean everyone is equal. It means everyone is accountable. And I think that is the basis for us to do a proper correction in Lebanon and start the reform. If we don't hold people accountable for what they have done, and everyone should be held accountable for what they have done, then on that basis we can start to say that actions will be measured, and therefore people will be evaluated based on their actions. And I think that is the fundamental part we need to do.
Thank you. Are these traditional parties able to attract new members from the youth generation, for example?
I believe a lot of those parties will continue to attract individuals, but from what we're seeing from university elections, for example, in Lebanon, most of the private universities that produce a lot of the future leaders are being taken over by the change movement. It is people who speak our language that are winning, and the traditional parties are barely scratching enough votes to win within the category of 16 to 20, 22 years old. So I think things are changing away from them. Not only then, I also think it was very interesting during the past election in May 2022 to see how the older generation, even people who were involved in the civil war and others, who had comrades who died in battle in Lebanon or other places, were starting to also reconsider their options and, if you want, trying to get to peace with what has happened, settling the past and saying now is the time to build our choices on the future we want.
Very good. In what order do you believe the Druze people and the Lebanese people in general believe in first? So there's 5 things here: family, religion, country, leader, yani zaim, and money. which order comes first and which is
Yeah.
last?
Definitely the Middle East, not only the Druze, prioritize family. And I think that personal story and commitment, especially with the families being spread across borders and other places, that unit continues to have a great value.
So you believe number one is family, not country.
I believe in the current countries are not convincing enough for people to have country first. I wish everyone, and not only the Druze, everyone who lived in those countries do it. And by the way, this is one of the major transformations. In the 60s, 70s, anyone reading history would say the countries in the Middle East are the result of an agreement called Sykes-Picot between the French and the English to split up the areas of the Ottoman Empire, and they created quote-unquote fake countries. Right. I think in today's world, people are recognizing that those countries are actual units that have survived the test of time, that are way beyond a conspiracy theory that split up regions, and were able to consolidate into states that have their own challenges that need to find their way towards peace and progress. And I think with that moving forward, people more and more are being attached to their countries as a final, definitive political entity worth defending, sacrificing for, and managing their lives around. And I think that is part why country would be option number two. I would say the economy, not money, but economy would be number three, the ability to work and prosper and have opportunities, protect investments and homes and businesses. I think that is fundamental, and this is why we see a lot of immigration going towards the Gulf, where people are capable of producing, prospering, and hopefully returning to their homes successfully. Probably the US and Europe, people get more adapted to living there. I hope at some point everyone will find retiring in Lebanon is more interesting than Florida in the US, but we're a long way from that one. I forgot the last two. Zaim, I don't think that they're as relevant as they used to be.
Because based on religion is the other one. Religion and Zaim, you really think they're number 4 and 5? Because based on the elections of the past 50 years, it looks like most people put the Zaim first, and religion, and then country, and then probably family, and then economics.
I don't think they put the Zaim first. They put family first, and then there's this sense of loss of security. And then the answer, how do I protect my family? By supporting the Zaim. So the Zaim positions themselves as a solution to a problem. But now, because there's always this imaginary threat that we are under threat and someone's coming to kill us. Who will defend us? It's the Zaim. Obviously, after what happened in Lebanon during the past 4 years, when
maybe I should have added security. Maybe that's number one, and that's why they follow the Zaim.
The fundamentals, I think, for any community, and again, I'm speaking as a sociologist, not as a politician.
Yes, that's meant as a sociologist.
One is identity, two is the ability to prosper, and three are securities. These are three fundamental things that people look for. And you start with safety and security, which is the base and the fundamental. Then level 2 is families, home, belonging. And number 3 is your aspirations for the future. So in that priority list, safety and security comes first. This explains the attachment to someone who's ruthless but yet necessary.
Does it really? Because it's in contradiction to what the priorities you're saying. If you really care about your family, and you care about prosperity and economic prosperity, you should be not voting to these people.
Except if security was an issue. When the Zaim no longer can deliver security and safety, he loses that function. And when he loses that function, you go look for it in other options. That is exactly what's happening now. Because the only thing which is more powerful than work or family is safety and security. So if safety and security are threatened, they trump over the others. Now, when those leaders failed in providing business opportunities to grow, they failed in keeping the family because they're emigrating, and then you're no longer feeling they can protect you, the requirement for the Zaim is being reduced.
Right, because when we talk about security, I just don't only mean personal physical security, but also future security of your economic security or
even community making
security.
sure you have electricity,
Right.
making
Exactly.
sure you have
That's
running
all part
water,
of security.
making sure you have medicine.
They failed miserably in that, and they still voted for them.
I think it dropped sizably, and I don't think, okay, it will drop massively if there's a complete revolution. Given the situation in Lebanon, with Hezbollah, with weapons, sectarian identities, it's not going to drop overnight. But it has changed a lot. And here it is very important for the audiences to know that in the Lebanese election, the highest percentage of people who voted for change was within the Druze community in terms of percentage. We close to a quarter plus voted in that direction. And I think that is very indicative how more and more the Druze community is committing itself to change and, as a minority, seeking the protection of working state institutions and giving up on the old traditions that are happening. A quarter is more than a tipping point. It is much more than a single episode. A quarter of the population all across, from south to north, not in a particular region, not tied to any particular campaign, it was all across. And I think that is very indicative of the changing times.
And to follow up on that, historically, the Druze community has been the guarantor of the Lebanese state, to be honest.
They're founding community of the state.
Not only that, they were the ones always, when there's a threat, and today that threat exists too, they were the first and always the ones who understand it and who always protected with everything. And that's historically been their role, and I think they're doing that even though right now they're a minority.
That's how the story started in the beginning, when the Arab tribes settled Humat Thuhur, the defenders of the entrances to the eastern lands in the mountains of Lebanon. They were there to protect from crusaders and other invasions, so they were settled in that region, and they adopted the Druze faith.
That's true. That's why I think it's critical for Lebanon and all the surrounding countries that the Druze communities are supported and preserved, even though they're a minority, because truly they are the guarantor of the continuation of the state of Lebanon and other places. Moving on, do you believe Lebanon will be able to get rid of the corruption that has plagued their very existence? If yes, how?
I think things will start improving, yes. The reason is a large part of the corruption happening in Lebanon is due to the old system of governance in Lebanon. Besides the practices of the political parties that were basically militias, and those militias shifted to become de facto controllers of the state. Those militias and the people within them are starting to fade away gradually. But more importantly, I think the continuation of the state, especially with the reforms on the table now, are so progressed that as soon as reforms actually happen, there will be a lot less loopholes. So for example, in Lebanon, 6 months ago, the new public purchasing law went into effect, which basically adds layers of transparency. We have a new law which is access to information. It's been there for a couple of years. We have a whistleblowers law in Lebanon. And now we're working, and I'm going to propose an open data law. So all government data and transactions, except the security ones, of course, will become public for people to assess how funds are being dispersed and others. So I think those laws coming into effect will gradually start evolving greater transparency in the state of Lebanon.
That's good. In your opinion, can we rebuild a viable, prosperous, and democratic Lebanon if corruption is not stamped out and the rule of law is enforced on everyone equally?
No, I think the rule of law is fundamentally at the core of building a state. Accountability, everyone sticking to the constitution and the law is fundamental. This is why we have an issue with Hezbollah, who continues to run a militia outside the official sanctioned state apparatus, which is the Lebanese army, the institutions. So that needs to be resolved so we're able to build a state. In addition to holding people accountable for the explosion of the port of Beirut, for the murders and killings of Luqman Slim and other activists, we need that accountability and the rule of law to be able to build a state.
I mean, the accountability, I understand Hezbollah is a big part of it, but also we have to apply that to friends and foes equally, because friends also have committed those similar
of course, rule of law does not make any difference between those
the corruption runs all across the board, and that's unfortunate. But even the people we consider friends, who were like in the 14th movement, the April 14th movement,
March 14th,
sorry, they were part of the corruption,
of course.
And they should be
be
called out.
Yeah, March 14th movement basically focused on one issue, which is the removal of the Syrian hegemony over Lebanon. But it did not go as far as reforming the state. And this is why I think it ended, I'm sure, it's not only I think, it ended being we remove one hegemony to fall under the hegemony of another. Because the only thing that would have protected the sovereignty of Lebanon and protected Lebanon itself was if we had formed proper laws to protect the state and the rule of law. If that course was taken back in 2005, I don't think we would be where we are now, because we would have accountability instituted, and therefore we would be in a better state that is more equipped to deliver for its people.
I agree, and I think the fault lies fairly and squarely on the powers to be at that point, who are supposedly on the side of the March 14th movement. Unfortunately, they're the ones who, for their own very narrow interests, they basically destroy the movement. That's one of the best that Lebanon have seen in its entire history. And it was a great opportunity that was lost. How do you feel about nepotism in politics? Do you think that the sons and daughters of politicians should automatically inherit the positions as party leaders?
No.
I thought so.
That is from the 1800s. It's over.
Yeah. Do you believe in being held accountable, especially when you are a public servant? Should public servants be held to a higher standard?
I think public servants, given their responsibilities for the community, should be held at a very much higher standard, with a lot more less tolerance of any violations of laws. And I think that is part of what we should start applying whenever we're dealing with any person in the service of the public, because our current assumption in Lebanon is if someone is elected, then they become unaccountable, not the contrary. So I think we definitely need to flip that one and overturn it completely.
This is basically a follow-up. Do you believe the current and previous politicians were held accountable for their actions, or were held to a higher or any standard?
No, I think they were getting away with everything, simply by exaggerating community fears, warmongering, using illegally assumed public funds for clientelistic and individual profit and benefit, And I think that way of serving only their political allies and their partisans undermine the welfare of the entire country.
Right. Well, one of the examples of corruption, which this is very, in the Druze community, this has been talked about a lot. It's a scandal, actually. The Ain Hussein Hospital.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about the corruption that's going on. There's a lot of talk about how the bad treatment of people who are using the hospital, and even as far as wrongful death accusations because of mishandling and the way they operate that hospital, which, as you know, the history of that hospital, Sheikh Al-Aqil at that time,
Muhammad Abu Shakra.
Muhammad Abu Shakra, Allah yarhamu, he's the one who worked so hard to bring that hospital and make it a reality. And he went around and gathered funds from all the Druze families. One of them is my family that actually donated to that.
Yeah.
So everybody has an interest in that hospital, not to mention the fact that it is a central hospital for the Shuf area and all the surrounding
and mountainous areas in Alay as
exactly. So it's a very important hospital just from a human aspect. Forget the politics and all of that. What do you say to all these, to the scandal, and is there anything that you want to do to basically bring the people responsible to be accountable for that?
I've been following up on that issue specifically. I want to mention that this hospital is a community hospital. It serves the community and is very critical because there's no alternative for that hospital within that scope or area of coverage. It is also an institution which was built by the contributions of all the community. And recently, especially with the crisis, the way this hospital was managed, even before the crisis, was fully paid for. Most of its patients came from the lower income individuals who were either at the expense of the Ministry of Health or the army or institutions such as the Social Security in Lebanon. So it had failed before in becoming an institution that attracts individuals who trust the service of that hospital to cater for their solutions. I think there's a lot of audits that need to be done. There are investigations with proper documentation that need to be done, because we cannot afford either to lose trust or to allow this institution to fail, because it will not be easy to recover from the loss of that institution. And I am hoping, and through the work with other individuals that have started sharing some of the documentation that we have, to see means to legally, as well as through media and other pressures, to see serious changes in terms of transparency, in terms of governance, in terms of appointees of those who are running the hospital, to get to a place where even the doctors and the nurses trust the organization that they're working in, because it's been depleting resources and qualified people have been opting to leave. And therefore, even if the situation continues as is, we need to make sure that this institution continues to function as much as possible. Now, I will be more than willing also, whenever there are detailed facts and documentations, to follow up in terms of legal actions or other audits, or even working with the community to make sure that this institution regains the trust of the people that it is serving.
Yeah, because as you know, last year, the American Druze Society, with the help of some others, they raised over $1 million that they sent to Ain Hussein, and that program was supposedly to retain the doctors and nurses and the people who were working there. And the fact is, the numbers show that they did not only did they not retain a lot of they lost a lot of their qualified doctors and nurses, and the money, most people don't know what it was spent on. Even though they were providing with numbers, the program was based on the fact that they will share that money equally among the doctors. They start paying people who are closer to management more than doctors who are not, and they start, also favoritism played a big role. So this type of corruption has to stop, and that's why the program ended in the United States, because people found out this is what's happening.
They lost trust.
They lost trust, and they stopped sending money.
But this doesn't mean as well that we don't do an audit on the funds that were previously sent and ask for published reports on all of it.
There are reports and a lot of documents that are now available, and can trace it back to the people in charge, and the corruption is very clear that money has been misused.
Then legal action should be taken.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the things we needed to put the light on, because, as you said, it affects a huge amount of people that depend on that hospital to save their lives.
Yeah.
So
we cannot allow corruption to take over that hospital, which is for the community, and we cannot allow that hospital to stop operating. So we're working between two limitations, and we need to make sure that we have a proper plan to fix the situation when it comes to that specific hospital. Not only that, there's also the public hospital in Abrishmoun. There's also Al Iman Hospital in Alay. These are fundamental organizations that are catering specifically to the Jewish community. And the Jabal Hospital also in Babda, in Matn al-Ala. So I think those are predominantly within the community. And there should be an overall strategy to see how emergency rooms, operations, doctors and others, there could be a way to properly organize this. And I think the major challenge is going to be the political influence that is facing us, which is dominating in all of these institutions. And again, these are means where politics tries to dominate the community. I think those institutions becoming independent and accountable and transparent is fundamental for the return of trust to them, because I'm sure the Lebanese in the diaspora and the Druze community are more than willing to support. They're just not willing to support without proper transparency.
Absolutely, and accountability. And the fact is, we have supported, and they've sent tons and tons of medicine to the hospital from the United States and from Canada. If they want that to continue, they need to clean up their act. The fact is, corruption has no place in hospitals. This is a place for people to have, to go and get well. And to use that for any other purpose is really criminal, in my opinion. And they should stop. Okay. In your opinion, what are the three main reasons that are preventing the Lebanese people from creating a viable country and a functioning democracy?
Three main reasons. First thing I think is sectarianism. It undermines the ability for us to treat each other as equal citizens in front of the law. So that is a systematic issue that we have that we need to resolve. The second one is the political hegemony of wartime militias over the state apparatus and administration, which undermines the proper functioning of the state, even without evolving it. Okay? And third, I think it's for sure Hezbollah's influence and attachment to Iran and their weapons outside the state that continue to drive Lebanon into regional wars, open its borders, and involve Lebanon in illegal business activities all across, and undermine the ability of Lebanon even to collect proper taxation and control its state apparatuses.
That's good. That's good. Do you think it is time to create a new inclusive party that are non-religious and are based on a political, social, and economic agendas, and that promotes freedom, equality, civil and human rights, rule of law, and democracy for all its citizens.
That's a copy of Taqaddum's manifesto.
Is that right?
Yeah. So that is exactly the project that we're trying to do. That started in November 2019. We had the founding committee in March 2020. It's not a party, it's a political organization that is trying to evolve into creating a proper manifesto and narrative to cater to the Lebanese population, because today the solutions are well known. All we need to do is to organize and be responsible and be team players and help each other out as citizens to regain our country from those who have considered it their personal turf for so many years.
Well, that's good to hear. Okay, now we go into some of the big items that are happening right now. Do you know of any political leaders in Lebanon that are not corrupt?
Some of them, but they're not influential.
Okay. What is your position on the Syrian refugee problem?
I believe this is a massive issue, strategically and tactically, humanitarian-wise as well. I'm more and more becoming more convinced that the Syrian regime does not want those people back, and they are on purpose making it hard to repatriate those people by disallowing any reforms in public services or providing the guarantees for safety, security, and public services for people to go back to their homes. I believe that will continue to be an issue in Lebanon for many years to come, especially since the Lebanese state has not had a clear strategy on how to deal with 1.5 million Syrians living in Lebanon, nearly 1 million of them refugees. And I believe if we don't do that, this will keep on adding to the chaos and complicating the ability of Lebanon to recover.
By the way, their numbers are increasing by the day. They're forgetting that they give birth every single day, which is increasing their population by, I don't know, 100,000 every year?
55,000.
55,000?
Yes.
So that's
I realize the numbers, and I think, again, if there's no repatriation policy, 55,000 a year is not the problem. We have 1.5 million.
I know.
Yeah, so
55 on top of that every year.
Correct. So this is why I'm saying there needs to be a political resolution.
And these are born in Lebanon.
Yes, there needs to be.
So you're talking about another set of problems that could evolve from that.
Very true. If it is not organized, you can have 20 million people living in Lebanon, like in the UAE, like in other places. If you have rule of law, you'll put them to work, they'll help your economy, then fine. But we have refugees, and we don't have a strategy, and we don't have a functioning state. It becomes a hotbed for a lot of complications that will be threatening to the core of the Lebanese state.
That's right.
If we do not know how to deal with it.
I believe it already is a threat to the Lebanese state.
Given the weak situation in Lebanon now, yes, it is a big, complicated issue. Again, I think the solution comes from Syria mainly, by the Syrian regime having a serious strategy towards repatriation of the refugees.
What about the United Nations? They keep providing money. I'll bet you if that money stops tomorrow.
We did that exercise. Even if you stop the $90 or $120 you pay for the families, it will not be enough to go back. So if you have 1 million people in Lebanon, you're not paying them anything, and they won't go back.
Are you sure? Is it only 120? I thought it was $400 or $500.
No.
Per family.
No. Those are some of the misconceptions. The payments that are being given are not that big. This is why those families, even in that little amount, people underestimate how bad the situation in Syria is and how responsible the Syrian regime is for the crises that are happening to its own population. This is why people would rather stay with their families for $100 in Lebanon than go live in their villages back in Syria. So if you stop the money, you'll have 1 million people with no income. That will create a lot of chaos, especially if they don't go back and they have to feed their kids and provide for themselves. And the other way, if the only solution is you give them sizable amounts of money to go back to Syria and stay there, but that would require making sure that their life is not under threat and there are fundamentals for them to be able to operate and live in Syria, which means, again, the Syrian regime needs to allow international aid and intervention at a certain level to try and rebuild a certain part of the state in Syria so people can go back. And the Syrian regime doesn't want that. That is the main reason why Syrians in Turkey and Jordan and Lebanon are not going back to Syria. It's because the Syrian regime has not concluded a clear strategy with the international community and created a politically viable solution to allow for millions of Syrians to go back to their state.
Two quick questions. What is your position on the investigation of the port explosion?
We need to continue with that no matter how much time it takes, because accountability to this heinous crime is a fundamental duty of anyone in Lebanon, whether elected or not.
And what is your position on the judicial system in Lebanon?
We need to force the law to be voted on, which is the independence of the judiciary. It is obvious from what we're seeing now that the current situation of the judiciary is in tatters. It is following political agendas. Individual judges are going rogue. And if it continues this way, we will lose a prime institution that can help us recover the country. So voting on the independence of the judiciary, protecting judges is fundamental for us to be able to continue or start seriously building the state.
Last question. What is your position on the bank deposits? Should all the money be returned to the depositors?
The money for the depositors are their rights, but I always oppose politicians who basically say and promise they will return all the funds because they can find sources for it. The reality is those funds have been lost and they need to be recovered through returning the money that was lost through corruption. We need to return the money from the banks that invested it with the state knowingly. We need to return it from the central bank and other state assets that consumed all of those funds. But I think we also need to understand that there are economic losses. There are people who are not depositors whose lives have been destroyed. So all state assets and revenues need to first provide a layer of protection for everyone, make sure we don't have people dropping off. We need to provide fundamental services. And as economic growth happens, that's when we can start returning money. No one can return funds or deposits fully to their owners if there's no economic growth. Economic growth requires reform, fighting corruption, and holding everyone who stole a penny accountable. Other than that, no one's going to see money, especially the people who caused the problem will never be the solution.
That's so true. On that note, we're going to thank you and
thank you very
thank
much.
you very much.